You've heard the saying, right? All is fair in love and war. Well, what if I told you that's just completely wrong? Because war, as brutal as it is, actually has rules. Yeah, real, enforceable rules. There are lines you just cannot cross, weapons you're not allowed to use, and actions so unbelievably cruel they're considered crimes against all of humanity. So, where did these rules even come from, and what on earth happens when somebody breaks them? All right, so here's our roadmap. We're about to take a wild ride through history, starting with these ancient codes of honor and going all the way up to the modern International Criminal Court. We're going to see how these informal, kind of gentlemen's agreements slowly got hammered into solid international law. And you'll see the stakes just get higher and the crimes get a whole lot darker at every single step. So, believe it or not, this whole idea of fighting ethically is not new at all. I mean, long before anyone even thought of the term war crime, ancient civilizations were already laying down the law on the battlefield. Let's start way back in ancient India and China. What's really striking is just how similar these first rule books were, even though they were developed whole continents apart. Over in India, you had Dharma Uda, which basically means righteous warfare, and it was all about fair fights. Chariots only attack other chariots, that kind of thing. Then in China, around the time of Sun Tzu, sneak attacks were seen as super dishonorable. Both cultures, totally on their own, decided you don't hit people who are defenseless and you don't use poison. This was all about honor, sure, but it built the foundation for absolutely everything that came next. Okay, let's jump forward a couple thousand years to the American Civil War. This is where, for the first time in history, a single, all-encompassing rulebook was written down to tell an army how to behave. But this code had a really brutal contradiction baked right into it. So this thing, the Lieber Code, was issued by President Lincoln back in 1863, and it was revolutionary. I mean, it laid out super specific rules for how to treat prisoners, how to protect civilians, what you could and couldn't target. For the very first time, all those unwritten rules of engagement were put down on paper in one official military document. And here is that dark twist. The code explicitly banned stuff you'd expect, like murder, maiming, poison. But, and this is a huge but, it allowed for the starvation of civilians as a totally legitimate military tactic. It's a pretty stark look into the thinking at the time. Sure, protect the soldier, but the civilian population? They were still seen as just another tool you could use to win. It would take like another 100 years for that to finally change. So after seeing the absolute industrial-scale carnage of modern wars, the world's big powers realized, okay, our own national codes aren't cutting it. They needed international rules. So they all got together at The Hague to try and create the very first global treaties on how to conduct a war. This quote right here, from a meeting that happened even before the Hague ones, it introduces this brand new and incredibly important idea. The problem with a weapon isn't just that it's deadly. It's whether it causes unnecessary suffering. Basically, if a regular old bullet can take a soldier out of the fight, is it really necessary to use one that's designed to cause a much more gruesome, painful injury? The world was finally starting to say, no, it's not. So putting that principle into practice, the Hague Convention started banning specific weapons. Those dum-dum bullets, the ones that expand when they hit you, outlawed, because they cause way too much unnecessary damage. They also banned poison gas and a real sign of the times, bombing your enemies from hot air balloons. The goal was pretty clear. Finally put some international limits on just how brutal the battlefield could be. But, as it turned out, having rules for nations wasn't nearly enough. After the absolute, unprecedented horrors of World War II, the game changed forever. It wasn't good enough anymore to just set rules for armies. The world decided it was time to hold individuals accountable for their actions. And the path to that justice moved fast. As early as 1943, the Allies were already promising that anyone responsible for atrocities would be hunted down. And then, at the historic Nuremberg trials, for the first time ever, an international court put the leaders of a nation on trial for their crimes. And this is the absolute crucial takeaway from Nuremberg. The defense that you were just following orders was thrown right out the window. This principle established that every soldier has a moral and a legal duty to refuse an order that is obviously illegal. From this moment on, individual criminal responsibility became a cornerstone of international law. No more excuses. In the aftermath of the war, the world also created the 4 Geneva Conventions, which were just a massive leap forward for humanitarian law. The first 2 protect the wounded and sick, both on land and at sea.
The third says you have to treat prisoners of war humanely, no torture. And the fourth, for the very first time, lays out extensive protections for civilians caught in a war zone. These four conventions together, they are the absolute bedrock of modern humanitarian law.
And all of that leads us right up to the modern era. You see, after setting up temporary courts for the wars in Yugoslavia and Rwanda, the world decided it needed a permanent body to prosecute these kinds of crimes. And so we got the International Criminal Court, or ICC, which was established by a treaty called the Rome Statute. You can think of the ICC as the world's court of last resort. It only gets involved when a country is either unwilling or unable to prosecute these huge international crimes itself. And its founding document, the Rome Statute, has the most complete, most detailed list of war crimes ever written down. So, you want to see what's on the list? Okay. Article 8 of the Rome Statute lays it all out. It starts with what are called the grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions. These are the big ones, the absolute fundamentals. Things like willful killing, torture, and also willfully causing great suffering or serious injury. It also includes destroying a bunch of property for no military reason, taking hostages, and unlawfully deporting or locking people up. But the list goes way further than that, making a bunch of other long-standing rules official. It's now explicitly a war crime to intentionally attack civilians or civilian buildings. And that protection also covers aid workers and UN peacekeepers. The statute also formally bans pillaging a town, it reconfirms the ban on poison gas and those expanding bullets, and it outlaws declaring no quarter, which is a chillingly formal way of saying you can't just order your troops to kill everybody and take no prisoners. And the list ends with some of the most heinous acts you can imagine, many of which were officially defined as international crimes for the first time right here. This includes using sexual violence as a weapon of war, sexual slavery, forced pregnancy. It's a war crime to use civilians as human shields to protect your military targets. It's a war crime to enlist or use child soldiers under the age of 15. And finally, bringing us full circle from that old Lieber Code, the Rome Statute makes it absolutely clear. Intentionally starving civilians as a method of warfare is definitively a war crime.